Have you ever had a bad day, a bad week, month, or even a year? I suspect that one day the year 2020 will be used as an adjective to describe something that's bad or ugly. Let me give you an example. Try to imagine a married couple having an end-of-day conversation. How was your day, dear? It was 2020. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Why don't you go change out of those work clothes? I'll have dinner ready for you in a few minutes. Can you picture it? Did you see the scenario play out in your head? So did you envision the typical Ward and June Cleaver family? You know, a man come home from work and his wife caters to his every need? Well, let's look at that for a second. Without having any other information, you jump to the conclusion that it was a man coming home to a subservient wife. So was the couple white, black, other, or maybe a mixed race? And what if it was a stay-at-home dad and mom was the breadwinner? Or maybe a homosexual or non-binary couple? Sorry, it's too late. You've already committed to your choice. Without knowing the whole truth, you've made your mind up as to how this little story is going to play out. This type of thing happens countless times a day. We believe we know what someone's thinking, feeling, or needing. Most of the time, everything works out fine. But what about the other times? The times when you think you're having a conversation, the next thing you know, it turns into a shouting match. Or you know it's going to be a tough conversation because you have to show the other person the proper way to do things. Let's take a step back and examine what's going on here. Everyone has preconceived notions. You can't help it. It's human nature. Black is black, white is white. Oftentimes we fail to realize that most things in this world fall somewhere in between. You might make the statement, it's cold outside. To you, this may be true. But what if you made that statement to a penguin? He might retort back, I'm sweating to death over here. It's really all about perspective. Then there's the other times when the word debate is used. The intention is to discuss opposing views, speak about the merits of your view, then listen to the other side to find out what's important to them. This way you can work together to find a solution that'll benefit both sides. Unfortunately, most times the debate is treated like a boxing match, each person delivering as many devastating verbal blows as they can in an attempt to get the other person to back down or admit defeat. And if you don't get a knockout, then you look to the scorekeeper to find out who won. Why must the victory come at the defeat of another? Why can't you both benefit from the lessons learned? Now the question could be asked, are some people evil? As a general rule, I say no. They just have a different way of looking at things. If you're able to set aside your preconceived notions, just reflect on the information being presented to you, you might develop a different way of seeing things. You may not agree with the end result of their thinking, but you can better understand why they think that way. From there, you can start to build a bridge. One of the biggest blockers of compassion and empathy is when you first hear a statement that goes against everything that you hold dear. It can hit you like a sucker punch to the nose. You're seeing stars and your blood instantly begins to boil. It's fight or flight time, and you're not going to take this lying down. Your first instinct is to swing back even harder. Deliver a blow that's going to send your opponent reeling. So how do we overcome that? How do we take the punch and not strike back? How do we see them as anything other than evil? What works for me is to put myself in the other person's position. What makes them think and act the way they do? In my downtime, I run some scenarios in my head. I think of a situation where someone's done something that could be considered a heinous act, something that makes you wonder how someone could be so cruel. Then I break down the act. Each person has a set of skills, a talent, you might say, that if it were used in a different scenario, I'd be commending them instead of condemning them. From there, I try and figure out what their end goal was. Was it a coping mechanism, a survival skill, a way of advancing their agenda? Once I can get to that point, I can start to see them in a new light. Try to always respond with empathy, compassion, and giving from the heart. Seek deep within yourself to know that and express the true meaning of love. Love is not something to turn on and off. You don't choose who's worthy of it. All are worthy. It's up to them to decide how to receive it. If you always practice giving love, then it comes naturally when you need it the most. Go out of your way to find opportunities to share it. Several months ago, it was a cold, wet morning, and I had stopped at a gas station just off the highway in Murfreesboro. Beside me was a man on a motorcycle. I commented that I liked his bike, but it was way too cold for me to ride. He confessed that he was not riding out of choice. You see, he lives in Atlanta, and he was on his way to Ohio to attend his mother's funeral. This was his only means of transportation. I stood there for several minutes while this man told the story. He was hurting and having to make this journey alone. I offered him some words of compassion and encouragement. When we parted, there was a small bond between us. He knew that he didn't have to carry this burden alone, and that it was okay to rely on the kindness of a stranger. Recently, I was fortunate enough to be hired as a municipal code enforcement position. This position came with a backlog of old cases and a huge set of books which dictate how people should live in a civilized society. One of the old cases was for someone who could be considered a frequent flyer of violations. I read the notes of the previous cases. This has been an ugly relationship between this gentleman and the city for a long time. I went to the address and it was just as described. The house was worn, dirty, and probably a miracle that it's even standing. The piles of trash were literally stacked to the carport roof and scattered throughout the yard. I can't even give you a number of how many broken down and wrecked cars were in the grass. My first thoughts were that all this needs to be bulldozed into a pile, set on fire, and then bury the ashes. I went through the process of documenting everything, sent out a certified letter of notification, a violation, and later posted the notice on his door when it came back as undelivered. Over the next several days, I drove past multiple times to see if any progress had been made. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Late Friday afternoon before a 3-day weekend, I happened to drive by on my way back to the office. I saw a car that had not been there before. I decided I'd stop and talk to them about the violations, maybe see what could be done to get them resolved. The owner came storming out of the backyard, and he was hot. Before I could even get a word out, he laid into me about how the city was picking on him, how he wasn't going to let them tell him what he could and couldn't do on his property, and a million other things. He freely used profanity and made numerous threats to the violent retaliation he would do if the city tried to make him comply. Early in the conversation, I was fortunate enough to stop myself before I uttered the words, "Well, actually, we can tell you what you can do on your property." I felt my level of tension rise and the urge to want to fight back, but I knew that any words I spoke that sounded like a demand, they'd only be met with anger and resistance. Instead, I took a non-aggressive posture. My shoulders were loose, hands in my pockets, leaning against my truck, and had my legs crossed, just trying to look as calm and relaxed as possible. Every time he told me what he wasn't going to do, I focused beyond his angry words. This man was hurting. He just didn't know how to calmly explain his needs and values. I posed questions, made statements that confirmed the needs that he was trying to express. I learned a wealth of information about him and his property. See, the house had been owned by his grandmother and been in the family for 90 years. He was an Army veteran who served overseas and was medically discharged with post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, he struggles with multiple sclerosis, which causes extreme fatigue. His wife is dying with kidney failure, and he spends a lot of time caring for her. He's owned a business in a dangerous line of work. He's found ways to employ people who could not otherwise get a job so that they could feed their families. And he even tried to correct some issues where he believes our public works department has fallen short. I now have a much better understanding of the situation. After about 45 minutes, he calmed down for the most part. We even elbow bumped before I left. because handshakes are a thing of the past. I no longer have a problem before me. I have a person, and we can build from there. A lot of people in my position would have gotten upset. They would have been defensive and want to exercise their authority. Could have put them in a bad mood, ruined their weekend, and made them want to aggressively pursue the violations against this man. However, I had the opposite reaction. I was so thrilled about how well the nonviolent communication process worked when I needed it the most. I couldn't contain my smile for several hours that night. Don't get me wrong, I still want to burn his house down, but I'm open to working together to satisfy both his needs and the needs of the city. Now, during the conversation and using few words, I was able to convey to him that my wife also suffers from MS, and that I understood what he meant about being fatigued, about how a task that might make one person tired leave him stuck in bed for several days. I spoke about how I couldn't imagine giving up my accumulation of tools, and that I couldn't expect him to give up his either. Through a few simple statements, I was able to connect with him, to let him know that I saw him as a man, a husband, and a caregiver, a human being worthy of compassion and respect. I gained some trust and civility because I was able to reveal some of my own personal things, able to expose some of my own vulnerability. This is something that time and time again, we're taught to never do. Never show your weak side. Never give up. Don't let them know that you're hurting. Even a deodorant commercial tagline, never let them see you sweat. This line of thinking can never lead to compassion, never lead to working together, and never lead to what is best for everyone. Breaking through this destructive way of thinking is never easy, though. It's as ingrained in us as putting on our socks before our shoes. I'd like to show a short clip of a video that emphasizes this point.
Okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue. And I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And I think I have a problem, and I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no childhood shit. I just need some strategies. Thank you. So she goes like this. And then I said, it's bad, right? And she said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is gonna suck.
You can just break the cycle. Just let go of your ego. Just think about what's good for everyone, not just for you. There's no limit to what we can accomplish together. Thank you. And when you leave here today, try a piece of this.